Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we will be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and we are going to be talking about power blocks. I put off doing this tutorial for quite a while because I really wanted to get a feel for what I thought was correct, but we are going to be doing a tier list for central identity pillars, comparing and contrasting the various central identity pillars, and also in this tier list we are going to include all of the principal groups, because you can't really talk about one without talking about the other, because each central identity pillar will have two primary principles where you have to take one of them. So if you don't have access to any good principles, this will hurt the central identity pillar. And they also have access to at least one unique principal group, and with trade, two unique principal groups. And so because of this, we will be talking about these together and doing it kind of in a tier list format. For this, we will first be talking about the central identity pillars, comparing these, and then we will be talking about the principal groups afterwards, where we will be going over all 14 of these, or I think it's 16, something like this, just to kind of set some background ideas. I don't think that there's just a top 4 group of principles that you always slot in ever. I think they're really, really context dependent, and this is going to be something that we talk about a lot as we talk about each of these, because they are going to be good at various stages of the games or within certain contexts. And so timeliness of principal groups is going to be important, as is the generation of mandate. If you generate a lot of mandate, that means you can swap reasonably often, and if you don't generate a lot of mandate, you can't swap reasonably often. And so this is going to be kind of the underlying ideas behind what we are going to be looking at. And without further ado, let's get into the central identity pillars. Okay, so first up, we are going to talk about religious convocation, and we are going to talk about the two primary principal groups of divine economics and sacred civics that are tied or assigned to this religious convocation. In particular, this power block is really weak. It doesn't generate, or it's hard to maintain really high cohesion if you have people not of your religion. You get rewards for people not being of your religion. You get this clergyman investment pool contribution efficiency modifier, which they don't contribute a lot to begin with. You can make it so that they have more ownership over stuff, which is important, because having devout political strength is going to be important for having more cohesion, because the more powerful you're devout, the more cohesion you'll have. So this is something that's worth considering, and you'll probably want to give them a lot of wealth, and then you'll end up having a really strong devout. But the problem is devout's really bad for passing good laws, and so the main kind of reason to go religious convocation is roleplay, because you can impose state religion on bloc members, and so you can look to convert everyone to your religion, and this is going to be the main reason you're going to ever want to do religious convocation. You also have this conversion rate, and your statute gives you minus penalties from turmoil, which, while this is a good modifier, the biggest penalty from turmoil is your ability to construct buildings that are quickly, because it's state construction efficiency malice, and so you're going to want to build one of the most expensive buildings in terms of construction to reduce the construction malice. I don't quite see it, but it'll also give you a little bit of extra conversion rate, which is not nothing. But let's kind of take a look at the principal groups and see how they tie in, which these are going to be off to the right. Let's just slot this into D tier right now, and then let's take a look at the principal groups here, which are going to be sacred civics. Now, sacred civics is actually an interesting one that you can use in a timely fashion, mainly because Sacred Civics Level 1 is kind of a neat one, and is maybe something that's worth taking a point in just for a very short period of time, where you are going to get higher diplomatic proposal acceptance for countries with the same religion. You get plus 20. This is kind of substantive, and you could slot this in to try and get trade agreements really early on in the game, so that you could have good relations with some of the GPs if you share a religion with them. The problem is, not many of the GPs actually have the same religion. You have the Catholics in France and Austria. You have the Protestants in the UK and Prussia. Russia is Orthodox, and I feel like there's another GP, but they just... Oh, wait, okay, so it's the USA is also Protestant, and so you could maybe use this to generate two trade routes that you might not otherwise be able to generate. This is kind of an interesting thing that is maybe worth keeping in mind, and so because of that, we're actually going to give Sacred Civics C tier, because I think it's conditionally useful. The reduced liberty desire for the same religion is actually going to be quite useful if you are going this route, and so that is something to write home about because it'll allow you to annex people faster. I don't know what value this is. If it's 0.05, that's really not a lot. If it's 0.1, you're starting to get there, and if it's anything more than 0.1, that's actually maybe something to write home about. I haven't played around enough with Sacred Civics to know exactly what it is, but it's not going to be, even if it's 0.2 or something like that, this isn't worth the slots for, but if you're already tied in anyways, Sacred Civics, I think it's going to be better than the other alternative. And Bloc Leader can impose the same church and state law on Bloc members, so you can make people state religion. This is going to be important for maintaining cohesion, because if anyone goes total separation, it will tank your cohesion really hard, and you need cohesion to generate more mandate. Generating mandate is going to be important because it allows you to do things more flexibly in terms of slotting around different principal groups, which is going to be a play pattern that is useful. So we are going to put this up in C tier for that. Next up, we have Divine Economics, which it gives you income transfer from heathen subjects, which is a bit of an interesting one. I'm almost certain this is not a free money modifier, but if you're stacking a whole bunch of these modifiers, Vassal's base rate is 30%. You can get extra income transfer from a few things, like, for example, vassalization, and then you could also stack it with this. I don't think it stacks multiplicatively, but I haven't checked. If it stacks multiplicatively, then that is kind of getting interesting, and so you can make it so that they're having to transfer 50-60% of their income, and this is maybe a play pattern where you can build more inside of them because they have to transfer their tax income to you, and this type of thing. And okay, maybe there's something here, but I don't think this is. I think you play for this and then you're like, wow, I wish I just had 10% more construction, so I don't think this is very good. Unlocks the increased clergy oversight for financial districts and manor houses. This increases ownership of the clergy, which in a hyper late game scenario is maybe something that's good. It certainly would allow you to make the clergy a lot more powerful for helping maintain cohesion, and so if you are going to be playing one of these blocks, it is going to be an interesting one, and I think Divine Economics might be worth playing if you are leaning into the religion and you are having the devout really strong and you are trying to play to that. But the biggest thing is going to be this minus radicals from SOL decreases in accepted religions, and plus loyalists in accepted religions. This combined with all the various conversion modifiers you're going to be getting from various things like your schools, the block itself, and all this type of stuff is going to make it. This is a really substantive amount. This is equivalent of doubling, if I'm not mistaken about the numbers. I believe it is the equivalent of doing the same as a level 5 on guaranteed liberties, where I think each one of these is giving 5%, at least in your accepted religions, and so this is going to be quite strong. But if you're also on state religion, for your accepted religions, you'll also be getting radicals and loyalists here, and so you'll be hitting a critical threshold where if you yo-yo up both radicals and loyalists, or if you yo-yo your standard of living up and down, you will normally the way it works is the modifier or the base number for generating radicals is higher than the base number for generating loyalists when you have a change in SOL, so this will actually tank your loyalists. But if you stack enough of these modifiers, yo-yoing up and down will actually increase your SOL, and so you can do something like run high taxes and oscillate between the two and just generate a bunch of loyalists this way, but you're sacrificing an entire principal group where the main payoff is going to be this. I do think you get more out of Divine Economics. I think almost certainly you go Sacred Civics in the early game, and then you transfer to Divine Economics late game. If you are playing a religious convocation, would be my guess on how this plays. Really being able to impose state church and law will also be quite nice, but being able to scoop everyone into your interest group or that is of the same religion as you much quicker, because the ability to get extra Diplo approval will make it easier to pull people into your blocks in multiple ways. First by getting the agreements and then using those agreements to leverage to pull them into the block. So I do think that this is probably the early game, and then Divine Economics is late game. Divine Economics ultimately, though, I think is really weak, and so I think it belongs in the D tier, kind of with Religious Convocation itself, where it's okay. I mean, you can play around it to some degree, just pulling up my cheat sheet here, but I just think it's going to be, generally speaking, not very strong. Alright, so next up we are going to talk about the military treaty, which is one that's kind of a bit difficult to evaluate. Overall, I just want to emphasize, I think it's bad for single player, and that is the main context by which we're discussing. For multiplayer, this is probably the best one, but we are going to be slotting it into C tier and talking about why this is in C tier. So taking a quick look at the block, the prestige from Army and Navy is really not substantive. This is not going to be the main source of your prestige. It should probably count for more prestige. If it did, this would be a little bit nicer. May add free war goal when supporting another block member. This is going to be maybe good in multiplayer, where if you join anything on a block member, you're just going to get an enormous amount of war goals that you can put in as a result of this, and you can really break someone up with the release releasing countries from them. However, if you're just helping the AI, this is not going to be consistent enough to be able to provide some advantage. You can't go peasant levies, okay, fair enough. The training rate is going to be good for multiplayer, but it's also going to be good if you're really conscript based. Having training rate will cause your conscripts to come up faster, so that is going to be useful. As far as generating mandate goes, they're kind of okay-ish for generating cohesion, rather than the mandate. They are going to take a huge hit from having high infamy. This is really important to emphasize. You get a minus tick for every amount of infamy, so you can't really go high infamy with these guys and have a lot of cohesion. However, if you want to go high infamy, these are also the best guys. So it's kind of this weird kind of situation here, but you will mainly be getting it from your share from your total power projection of the military treaty. And so this will be better if you have a bunch of smaller people with you in terms of your subjects, or for pulling in smaller people. You also, as far as the principal group goes, or the power block goes, you will have this minus great power invitation acceptance chance. This is really common on most of these. It's hard to invite great powers. This was notably not present in the religious convocation, so pulling in great powers on that would be considerably easier if you wanted to build this big great power block. But for this one, you are going to be getting the penalty. This all block members training rate very, very strong. But the main kind of appeal of these is going to actually be aggressive coordination is actually a pretty good principal group. And it is the unique principal group for military treaty, meaning you cannot use it if you are not on military treaty. So let's kind of jump back into the browser and take a look at these principal groups here. Overall, the defensive one's not very good, but this offensive coordination, the defensive one's not good. Aggressive coordination, minus 30% maneuvers cost for war goals in offensive plays. So I think if you do go military treaty, you probably go aggressive coordination, and you just actually don't rank up to level 3, which is a little bit of a hit to your cohesion, because slotting these in will help to increase your cohesion. But the minus maneuvers from cost for war goals in offensive plays is quite strong. This will allow you to release a lot more countries in single player, but it's really not that strong until you go high infamy. What I think the main use of going for, the power block of military treaty is, and why it's in C tier instead of D tier, is as soon as you go high infamy, this becomes the best principal group of the entire game for minus maneuvers cost, because you can just put in like 10 war goals and make half of them primary, and there's not much they can do, especially if you are layering it with having someone who's reckless, which gives you extra maneuvers. This synergizes with the minus 30% maneuvers cost, and so you can have 150 maneuvers. Everything costs, only 2/3 what it normally costs, and you can really layer in a ton of war goals. This was one of the things we did kind of in the UK run, where we showed kind of the end game of what had happened there. Was we stayed really low infamy forever, and then we switched to an entirely different block. We actually switched to a military treaty from a sovereign empire, and then once we had decimated all the big people, we swapped to a trade league afterwards. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it actually becomes quite common in playthroughs where you're going for some sort of late game world conquest type thing, where generally speaking you're going to start off with some other type of block, but you're going to switch to a military treaty just for aggressive coordination. Minus war exhaustion from casualties, who cares? Minus power block cohesion, this is bad. Can use the call ally sway to pull all black members into all plays. This is not very useful, because you actually don't want your allies helping you anyways, because they don't know how to fight, and they'll just cause themselves to rev, and the revs will be more annoying than their help helps. Their help only hurts. And you'll also get extra infamy generation, which if you're not going high infamy, this is an absolutely terrible modifier. This is really really, really sickeningly bad. And so it's kind of this weird sort of thing where you generate a lot less mandate because you're less cohesive if you go high infamy, and the thing that is very best about this block is the aggressive coordination. So we're going to put aggressive coordination in B tier because I think that generally speaking you don't want to go high infamy for most of the game, but as soon as you do, this one's actually just outstanding, and so like it's like D tier most of the time and S tier sometimes, and so we're going to put it in here. And then defensive coordination just is terrible. Nobody likes this one. Okay, so to take a look, cannot join or start wars against bloc members. This means you can't annex subjects. This is an important play pattern to be able to do. As far as I know, this means you can't annex subjects. I guess I haven't double-checked this, but I don't even want to slot this in. The minus maneuvers cost to sway bloc members in defensive plays doesn't seem particularly useful, maybe mildly useful in a multiplayer, but rather just have them, just sway them in on the aggressive coordination. It's whatever. Because you're getting minus 30 on the war goals in offensive plays anyways. Well, I guess you have to be on offense, but okay. Bloc leader can impose the same army model on bloc members. This will help you to maintain a little bit more cohesion, and can use the call ally sway on bloc members in defensive plays, regardless of if they have an interest or if you have an alliance. Overall, it doesn't seem as strong, especially because both of this one, kind of in the late game, you can call everyone in and can call everyone in here, seem really, really bad in... There's a lot of antagonistic things going on with this power block where this is really bad if your other powers in the block are powerful, are really, really weak, and if they're not really weak, then it's hard for you to maintain cohesion, and so how exactly are you supposed to play this? Overall, it seems like you're pulled in multiple directions. The very best thing, you get a reward for playing high infamy, but everything you do that's kind of good is going to make it harder for you to maintain such a high cohesion level, so really kind of just like a lot of feels bad in terms of what your things are doing as they relate to each other in regards to this group, but we're going to kind of put this in here. I think that this actually just might be straight up the worst. Defensive coordination, don't think it's very good, and so we'll have this kind of situationally military treaty is going to be quite strong, but most of the time it's not worth doing. Next up, we're going to talk about ideological union, and it's also two component parts, which are creative legislature and, if I'm not mistaken, ideological truth, are going to be the primary principal groups for the ideological union. But the main benefit of the ideological union is you can force people to pass laws that you want them to pass. It also makes it really a lot easier for you internally to be passing a lot of laws, which is maybe an argument for, like, if you are starting off relatively small and you can make your own block, but you won't generate much mandate. This one actually is maybe the best one, just from the perspective of getting this law enactment time and some of the benefits from one of the low level things. Sovereign empire is not going to be good. Vassalization is not good unless you have a lot of subjects. This one actually just might straight up be the best one to have if you were going to somehow be small, not generating a lot of subjects, and just kind of doing your own things, passing laws. Ideological union might be best, and then you just swap to a different block later. It might not be worth the relations hit, but it is an interesting one to think about. But the main benefit here is the success chance. But going through it, minus law enactment time is better the more of it you have. If you float your authority and you also have over 90 legitimacy, which is going to be important for the block, then you can make it so that you will be getting minus 60% law enactment time, so you can really whiz through passing laws. You can impose government principles and distribution power on bloc members, not just subjects. You can do it on most of your bloc members are going to be your subjects, so this is maybe not that helpful, but can force regime change on bloc members. This is the really big one, or it is a really big one, because coming into here, playing as Austria, we just had a nightmare when we played as Krakow here, but if we have the Industrialists in, or we have the Intelligentsia in, we can force other people to have them in, and then once they're in, we can use their clout to pass laws. Plus, if we already have a law like no migration controls, we can get something like 50% to pass no migration controls. So far, don't think I've been able to successfully pass no migration controls a single time as anything other than an ideological union as a subject. And while I think there's probably better ways to do things, if you wanted to do like a giant communist bloc or something like this for RP, the ideological union's not that bad overall. They also have a pretty strong kind of statue bonus. If we could jump in here and we hover over their statue bonus, they are going to be gaining plus 25 for universal pop political strength, which if you build in your early manufacturing centers will actually be pretty good for getting the trade unions to demarginalize, because the universal pop political strength also influence isn't not anything to sneeze at, but I think paying that amount of construction for 5 influence isn't worth it. But building in major infrastructure centers or major population centers for the universal pop political strength, this is kind of made to go like communist and like do this type of thing in terms of the flavor and what you have going on. Let's jump in and take a look at the principal groups that are tied to the ideological union. Overall, these do not seem all that strong. They are going to be at the top here. We have creative legislature, which is going to give you minus law enactment stall chance, which, okay, if you have, this is, if you have opposition that's like 50% of your government, and then you get minus 33% law enactment stall chance on it, that's pretty substantive. I think this is percentage. I'm actually not sure if it's percentage or flat. Flat would be considerably stronger. There's minus to preserve and restore support, so you're not going to generate as much radicals, and +1 maximum law enactment setback. I think creative legislature, the main kind of appeal of it is it's going to make it easier for you to force your subjects to pass laws, and is going to be maybe less useful for yourself in that regard. To some degree, this is going to be the same for ideological truth. Both of these do not have a lot of teeth to them, but taking a look at these, minus popularity of agitators in opposition, sure, it's going to be harder for them to agitate. The minus suppression cost and bolstering cost, this is not a reason to use ideological truth, which is the one that is locked behind ideological union, because it'd be better just to generate more. It'd be preferable to just have a way of generating more authority, but since you have to lock in on one of these, just in terms of benefiting you, ideological truth might be better. But if we have a situation, though, where we are going to form a bloc, and we know we won't generate a lot of mandate, we know we're just going to be stuck with what we make, creative legislature with minus law enactment stall chance, just those two alone will allow you to take someone who has really bad laws at game start and maybe do something with it, just kind of defending it overall. The 20% party whip impact on ideological incoherence is going to be quite nice, and is going to be really important because maintaining high legitimacy for ideological union is going to be really important, and 25 minimum legitimacy means you could always pass laws, which for your subjects is going to be good because you can force them to have a government that's not very legitimate, that has certain people in it by regime changing them, and then they have the minimum legitimacy, and if you already have the law, you will get plus 30% enactment chance, so you can get something like 40% enactment chance trying to pass a law you have no business passing with ideological truth. Overall, I think both of these are pretty weak, but I think that, you know what? I think I actually might flip kind of the initial ratings I had on these, but we are going to put ideological union kind of a bit higher up here in C tier, where it is playable, but I don't think it's very good. We are going to put this down in D tier, creative legislature, and then we are going to put ideological truth kind of up here right behind the ideological union, down here in C tier, where overall this is not going to be very strong, but I do think if you're trying to play towards having everyone follow your ideology, it will actually play pretty well in terms of flavor, and there's stuff to lean into, and in terms of like, it's really, really nice QOL having these types of things when you are the block leader and you are getting, you know, this very, very significant law enactment time. Also, a big kind of thing that informs how much mandate you generate, which unfortunately is an important consideration, is going to be your own legitimacy. I believe you also get a penalty from not having people following or having the same primary principle governance, or I forget if it's ideological dissimilarity or not having the same power structure type of things as you, but I think there's other ways to acquire malice. They've reworked this since we had our kind of run where we went ideological union, but you will generate a lot of your cohesion from your own legitimacy, which is kind of a double-edged sword because you have to maintain really high legitimacy if you're going to play this, and I I just think that this is really painful in a lot of spots, and there will be a lot of spots where you aren't generating a lot of mandate, and this feels bad. And if you had a way to consistently be at plus 100, this would probably be an entire tier up. But if you're not going to be generating principles or mandate very fast anyways, though, I do think it's an interesting or good look to maybe go creative legislature. I mean, maybe there's some times where you would maybe go creative legislature as someone else, but I really kind of doubt it. I think that you're just doing, the only time you're ever doing creative legislature, and definitely the only time you're doing ideological truth, are when you have the ideological union, and overall, I think it's pretty medium / like playable, but not very good. Notably, ideological union, also very similar to the religious bloc, does not have a malice to pulling in great powers or anyone else. The pulling in great power malice is going to be present for the other 3 blocks, but ideological union does not have it, and so it is easier to pull someone who is quite large into the bloc, at least if they're a great power. Alright, next up, we are going to look at the somewhat innocuous looking trade league, but I do think it's one of the stronger ones, which we are going to have internal trade with, as well as external trade. Now, taking a look at it, it doesn't look that significant when we look at what it shows you on the wiki, which is it gives you trade route volume, which this is good. It gives you convoy's contribution to market owner, which is kind of okay, and it also gives you a customs union. The only other way to generate a customs union is going to be through the market unification, and kind of spoiler here, I think market unification is sufficiently weak that if you are ever going to try and have your own customs union, or this is something important to you, your central pillar should just probably be trade league. But what this is not showing you kind of in here is going to be if we hop into game and form a trade league as the USA, which will of course make everyone upset. The cohesion is really easy to maintain high because this doesn't have a cap from being a leading goods producer in the power block, and having a share of GDP I think does have a cap, but for the most part you will almost always be over 80 cohesion on the trade league, and so you'll generate mandate very quickly, very consistently, and also pulling people into your block. You do have the great power invitation chance acceptance penalty, but you have the smallest block cohesion penalty per block member, and so this means you can form a really, really large block without starting to suffer penalties. This is going to be, everyone else is 2 except for the Sovereign Empire, which is -3, so this is kind of substantive, but you just taking a look at your statue as well, you are going to have plus 10% infrastructure per 100k population and plus 10% loyalists from standard living increases. This is probably the second best statue, and is probably the best statue to spam. Getting this loyalist from standard living increases, we talked about it earlier, but if you can stack enough of this modifier, the base rate for loyalist generation from standard living increases and radical generation from decreases, it favors the radical generation. However, if you stack enough of these modifiers, you get to the point where you kind of hit this critical point where shuffling up and down in terms of SOL actually increases people's loyalty, whereas kind of at base rates it does not, and so this can be an important modifier for being able to do this, but also the additional loyalists from standard living increases will help to prevent turmoil in key states, allowing you to construct there, and so it is going to be pretty nice as far as the statues go. But the main attraction is that you probably overall have the best principal groups as your primary principal groups, where both of them are quite strong, and so let's kind of just jump back into the browser and take a look at your primary principal groups as they are. So scrolling down to the bottom here, we see that external trade doesn't look that good, just kind of at first blush. You have minus trade route costs, trade route with block members, kind of whatever, because if you have trade league as your primary, this is going to kind of do nothing because everyone's in your market. You have extra trade route competitiveness. It's really not that great, but the really big one is going to be the influential trade center, where, and you can also establish trade routes without an interest. Again, this isn't going to be really good, but the influential trade center, if we jump back into game, we can take a look at exactly what that gives you. Influential trade center will give you, your trade centers will give you +2 influence. And 25% migration attraction, which is fine enough, but the +2 influence is really the thing to write home about here, where you are going to be gaining like if you have 500 trade routes, you'll get 1,000 influence, and you can use this to really kind of pull people into your block really well, maintain a bunch of bankrolls, maintain a bunch of improved relations, maintain a bunch of trade agreements, this type of stuff. There's really a strong principle for playing the whole Diplo game, and a big portion of the game actually, like in terms of playing highly optimally, involves around getting bankrolls from great powers. With external trade and the influential trade center, it is really easy to maintain high relations with every single great power. And if you're a great power yourself, often this becomes difficult because you can't declare a lot of rivals. You can't have a bunch of rivalries because there's really not that many options. If you're a minor power, or a major power even, you can declare a bunch of rivalries and generate a ton, but you are going to have a bit of difficulty. And so external trade, one of the very best kind of primary groups that you have access to because of this influential trade center. This is pretty good early on, but scales up as the game gets later and later. And of course, the increased trade route volume I think actually in some ways kind of hurts this, that you get just off the base of the trade league, the 10% trade volume, because it is per level in a trade center, you're getting an additional, off of this influential trade center, you are gaining an additional 2 influence. But this is really strong. Everything that you kind of use Diplo for, it's going to be useful for it, and that should, like, we're not going to go into everything you could use Diplo for, but this is a really strong group. And then we have internal trade. And internal trade just kind of needs to be compared to market unification, where the point of market unification is it gives, largely it gives you the customs union. You already have that with the trade league, but here you are going to give extra contribution to owner's market, and also 10% company throughput. You can see 10% company throughput here. Extra contribution to market owner, it's stacking on the other one, extra tariffs, so it will be harder for people to trade with your block if you do not want them to, because your AI will generally tariff, and if you're tariffing yourself, you can really protect your own goods. I don't think this is a strong thing to do, but you can do it if you'd like, especially if you're trying to RP something or something like that, or maybe you just want to keep all the world's rubber for yourself. We also see 10% infrastructure on both of these, an additional convoy contribution to market owner, where it is going to match at 40 and 40%. But this minus cost of port connections, really strong modifier, especially if you're someone like Great Britain who has their trade center. Well, you should move your trade center, but your trade center is on an island or something like this, where you have to ship around and you're like shipping to China or this type of stuff for your port connections. They can get a little bit out of hand, and you basically will never have problems when you have internal trade on. But I think the main one here is the company throughput bonus, where if you're trying to maximize late game economies when you have a lot of companies, this actually starts to look really good. And if you're in the late game and there aren't that many GPs left and you can't, the pulling people into your block is less beneficial, and getting bankrolls from GPs is less of a thing, the influential trade center is going to fall off. So I think that, kind of in the early game, you would go external trade with the trade league, and then late game, internal trade is still very, very solid. So we're going to put these into kind of their tier lists here, where we are going to put in A tier the trade league, and then we are also going to put internal trade up here just ahead of it, and then external trade we are going to put a little bit ahead of that, where these are kind of all the A tier, all extremely solid, nothing like crazy slam dunk good, but being able to generate basically a mandate as quickly as possible is going to be really nice. And also mandate is generated based on how many people are in the block, and the isn't that they don't say the modifier here. Okay, they see the modifier up here in terms of mandate generation, but that's not kind of showing up because we have it clipped. And so just kind of taking a look over here, you can see that this is how we're generating mandate, right? It is going to be easier as the trade league to pull people in your block kind of than any other one, especially from the extra trade route volume. This will help for pulling people into your block because you will increase dependence. And then on top of that, you will almost always have over this high amount of cohesion, and so the mandate generation will just generally be very fast relative to the other ones. This is probably the primary thing, but having both internal and external trades, which are very strong, makes this block very, very solid, and in my opinion, probably the best overall. But it's really kind of the ways you're comparing it to the next one we're going to talk about is very, very oblique in terms of Sovereign Empire. It's going to be strange, and it's going to be really good in some spots, and it's going to be less good in others. But I do think Trade League overall is probably the strongest block, which means we're not going to have an S tier block. So the cat's a little out of the bag here. I did say I thought Trade League was better, but I do think Sovereign Empire is also A tier, and I think that Sovereign Empire in a lot of situations is going to be better than Trade League, and just a lot of situations Trade League is also going to be better than Sovereign. I think that both are going to be really, really good. Sovereign is going to just be a lot more oblique and strange, but we are also going to talk about this group, which I forget what it's called, and vassalization over here, which are going to be the principal groups that are tied to the Sovereign power block. So kind of taking a look at it, this minus 5% weekly liberty, desire, and subjects. This is a modifier that I just have to talk about. So annexing subjects, this is going to make annexing subjects feel a lot better, and it's going to make keeping them really loyal a lot easier, which is going to be important, because if we jump back in the game and we take a look at the Sovereign Empire here, one of the big things is we will get a malice from people who have a low relation with us, which I think all the blocks do, but also ones that have high liberty desire. So, we will also gain an amount based on having the highest prestige in the block. Generally speaking, the really, really big drawback of Sovereign Empire is it's hard to get over and maintain over 80 cohesion while still kind of benefiting from the block and playing the block how it should probably be played. To the end of reducing the the liberty desire, it's actually going to be useful for maintaining a little bit more cohesion. But the elephant in the room, in my opinion, is the annexation malice, where basically, if you go to annex a guy, and we will go to annex a guy here, you will have a chance of succeeding. This is capped at 75%. You will notice that these percents don't math up to 75%. They would be considerably over 75% with plus 275 and only minus, what is this, like 150? And so what will happen is if they accept, there will be no penalty towards our other subjects. Zero, none. If they refuse, so 25% of the time, there will be a 0.2 or 20% liberty desire malice. This malice is not tenable or worth playing against, so unless you're just annexing, maybe like Persia's worth annexing, or China or something like this. But for the most part, I think you just don't annex people if this is the thing. And so you can also save scum this. My approach has generally been, I think that this malice is inappropriate, not in the sense that the flavor is amiss, because I definitely think annexing your subjects should make some of your subjects mad. I just think that it shouldn't be so binarily good or bad, contingent on a die roll. And I think that as a game mechanic is unfun, and it just basically means you don't want to annex people. If you want to annex people, this makes Sovereign Empire better. If you want to save scum this annexation thing, this makes Sovereign Empire better. If you don't, then it makes Sovereign Empire a little bit worse, and you are kind of going to be inclined to make a lot of subjects with Sovereign Empire, which we will talk about in just a little bit of a second. But we also want to show off that Sovereign Empire does have, in my opinion, the best statue, minus decree costs, which is going to synergize a lot with the extra additional generated authority in Sovereign Empire, which is what you're going to want to go for. This minus decree costs makes it so you can really spam hard on some of the decrees. Let's actually just pull up a little bit of a run here. So in this Great Britain run we have here, we actually started off with Sovereign Empire, and we had the vassalization principal group, which we'll talk about in just a second, which gave us a ton of authority. And then we also had the statues here, which allowed us to assign a bunch of edicts, and we have been assigning all 4 of these edicts in these 4 provinces for quite some time now, and they got built up really, really big. Very, very strong states off of the back of this, and this can be done quite cheaply and easily with the Sovereign Empire in the vassalization principal group in particular, which is going to be probably the one you take, but off of the back of this statue, which the statue's not here no more because we changed principal groups, but being able to put down, especially if you don't have a lot of states, but you have a lot of power per state, this minus decree cost is going to be really nice. You could stack it with ambitious as well, the character trait, on rulers, which is probably something that is worth considering, which is going to allow you to build super tall, in various states that you find important, and also really, really push migration. If you want to, you can lay down an enormous amount of migration decrees. I did want to talk very briefly about economic systems and Sovereign Empire. I think Sovereign Empire actually wants to play interventionism. The reason why is kind of going back to the fact that if you can pull someone to your block, you can subjugate them if they're a minor power or more, and interventionism leans into that quite nicely. If you're on laissez-faire, anyone can buy your buildings. And we won't get too into the math of it right here, but if you build in a foreign country, let's say we get a investment rights agreement with Belgium, we build in their country, we build a building. I think that Britain starts with one, but if we build a building here, they can actually purchase it for roughly 1/3 of the price that it costs us to build it in terms of construction goods and labor. They can purchase it for 1/3 of the price using their investment pool. And they will purchase it if it's on laissez-faire. If you're on interventionism, this cannot be done. And in particular, you're going to want to really aggressively try and pull people into your bloc, because you can subjugate them if you pull them into your bloc on sovereign empire. And so you're going to want to get foreign investment rights, invest, and then with interventionism, you just don't ever toggle these to be sold publicly, and the state just owns them abroad, and you can slowly sink your teeth into them. This is going to also be really important because this power block is the worst at pulling other people in to your power block, because you have this -30 power block invitation acceptance chance, which of course you should have, because you could subjugate any minor power or lower that you pull in, but this is going to be really bad for pulling in majors and above. So you're going to be trying to play for minors. You're going to be trying to inflate your own prestige, because if you inflate your own prestige, you can decay people who are majors down into minors. But you see this -20 great power invitation acceptance chance. This is the worst. This -10 major power invitation chance. This is not present in other countries. And unrecognized major power invitation chance -10%. All of these together are a little bit rough, so you will probably need foreign investment to pull people in as easily as you could with other blocks. Also, you get this minus power block cohesion per block power block modifier member, which is really going to strain the cohesion, because the cohesion you don't even develop that well anyways. And so it's going to help if you have the most prestige in the block, but throughout our UK run, it was actually incredibly hard for us to get over 80 cohesion, which is bad for generating mandate. However, when you have an enormous amount of power block members, you're going to generate the mandate fast anyways, so it wasn't a problem for us as Great Britain. But you reach this kind of situation where in order to generate mandate as this power block, you're going to want to pull more people into the bloc diplomatically through foreign investment and this type of stuff, but you're also going to probably want to subjugate them through violence. But if you subjugate them through violence, you'll have people with really high liberty desire as well. So the catch-22 here is that it's a little bit harder for you to kind of develop what you want going on, and it's going to be harder for pulling people into the bloc to actually make use of the subjugation mechanic. And I think the only way that it kind of makes sense is on interventionism. If you don't go interventionism, the AI, like let's say we build in Belgium, the AI tends to not build a lot of construction. And I know we're just kind of on a fresh game here, so they're not going to actually have a lot of construction, but the AI doesn't build a lot of construction. What this means is they will have an investment pool that exceeds kind of the construction capacity, so it'll just be sitting there waiting for you to build up something in terms of a foreign investment, and then as soon as you build it, they'll just snake it and buy it up, and so you'll actually just boost their economy a whole lot without getting much return in terms of getting a foreign economic dependence on you in order that you can pull them into your bloc. So I do think that you kind of want to go interventionism on sovereign empire in order to fully leverage the power of being able to subjugate people. But if this is what you're doing, then you're probably playing interventionism, right? And I don't know how to evaluate how bad having the worst economic law is, because this is definitely worse than laissez-faire in terms of just the pure economics. And you could play laissez-faire, you could get an investment agreement and just not actively build in other people's countries, because then what will happen is your capitalists will build in Belgium, but then they'll own the building and it will never be put up for sale for Belgium to buy. And so it creates this strange play pattern, makes it hard to evaluate the sovereign empire. Maybe it's quite a bit better than I think, because I haven't tested going on interventionism specifically and trying to pull people into your bloc with the extra leverage that you have from not letting the buildings be sold off. You can notably do this on agrarianism and other kind of systems as well. You just can't do it on a system like laissez-faire, which has the forced privatization and nationalization here. Since you're forced to always have stuff be privatized, you can't, or you can't have national buildings. You can't prevent the local capitalists in foreign countries from being able to effectively steal some of your construction. And so, yeah. But coming back into kind of what we're more talking about here, more the topic here. In terms of the power block, if we scroll down to the principal group, we do have the unique one, which is exploitation of members. I don't think this one's very good. You get minus power block cohesion. You already have cohesion problems. You get extra block leader authority. We'll talk about this in a second when we talk about vassalization, but you can generate a lot of authority with vassalization, so this 20% is not very appealing. And non-block leader member authority minus, and then here you'll get another -5 for -10 total. You'll get extra influence, but here's the thing. I think if you want to get influence, it's much better to go external trade, which everyone can do. It's just trade league primary, it's not trade league only. So if you want to generate influence, I think you go external trade. I think if you want to generate authority, I think you go vassalization. And I think vassalization is just considerably better than sovereign empire primary in terms of the sovereign empire primary one. So but let's finish talking about this, and then you will get an additional -20 and then 5% income transfer to block leader. Now this is interesting in the fact that you could like stack this up. You can't stack it with religious convocation, or sorry, divine economics, so you can't get like all the income transfer stuff, but you can stack it with, plus 25% income from subjects. I think this is a multiplicative modifier, if I'm not mistaken, and this is a more modifier. So this, if we're on vassalization, this brings vassalization from 30 to 35%, and this modifies that 35%. So you can get over 50% tax income transfer, which will make it so they're kind of poor, and you get a little bit of money. And then if you're on interventionism anyways, you can just build a bunch of stuff in their country, and then if you're taxing 55% of their taxes, or if you're getting like 55% of their taxes, then you don't really mind too much that you're building in someone else's country, because it's almost like building in your own country, or it's like building 55% of the way in your own country, except for you get all the ownership back in your home state, just as long as they can't buy the buildings from you. So this is kind of another reason. Overall, I don't think exploitation members is worth using, but it's interesting to think about, kind of just pushing the limits of getting stuff out from your subjects. But if we'll just come in here, we'll talk about vassalization real quick. Plus 25 authority per subject. With Great Britain, when we have 30 subjects at game start, it's like 750 authority. That's enormous. And then there's going to be multiplied by various modifiers like religious. I think the devout gives a plus 10 or 20% or something like this. If they're happy, it ends up being an enormous amount of authority, plus the minus authority decree cost on your building for your monument, for your power block statue. It makes it so you can just use a lot of decrees in a way that's pretty good, and a lot of QOL, because you will also be able to slot in all the consumption edicts at the very game start for the rich. So it basically gives you like a new tax system where the rich get hyper taxed, and it gives you a lot of control over a lot of money. And so this is kind of a very, very strong thing. However, it requires you have a lot of subjects, otherwise it's not very useful. So this is kind of another one of the things where I think that if you're a small country, or you're a country with 0 subjects, going vassalization maybe is not so good. And so this is going to be one of the penalties. We also get plus 25% income from subjects. I don't think that this is, if I'm not mistaken, no, this is not a free money modifier. And then can use decree in subject states. Not going to be too useful, although if you are foreign investing, maybe there's an argument to doing stuff to decrease their turmoil or increase their state construction or something like this, or even migration. In some instances, if they have like rubber but they can't deploy it up or something like this. I think overall this is not going to be worth using, but you do want to do it. If this is your primary principal group, you would want to go to level 3 just for developing the cohesion. But if you're not, just sitting on level 1, pretty strong if you have a bunch of subjects. It does make you want to play a little bit differently, where you want to go after a bunch of subjects early on. But okay, we're going to put in the blocks, where we are going to put vassalization in A tier. It is going to be contingent on you having a bunch of subjects, but it is quite strong. And maybe we're having this a little bit high just because our experience with Great Britain, where it was insane, and we're not fully appreciating that Great Britain just starts with a ton of subjects. And for a lot of other countries, once you get rolling, I think having like 8 subjects or 12 subjects, it really isn't that hard, and it isn't a bad play pattern, and that'll be giving you 200 to 300, authority, and so that'll be kind of strong enough, in my opinion, for this to be A tier, but maybe it belongs kind of back here, or maybe it even belongs in B tier. I'm not really sure. I'm not very confident in exactly where this goes. It just, like, on Great Britain, it just seemed insane specifically. And then I just generally don't think that this one's going to be worth using. The exploitation of members one, I don't think it's very strong, and we are going to put that in a D tier down here. And that is going to be all of the primary principal, or all of the central pillars, along with their primary principal groups that are tied to them. All right, so next up we have all of the primary principal groups that are, all of the principal groups that are not primary principal groups are tied to the blocks. All of these ones are tied to the blocks, and these ones are just generic ones that are going to be available to everyone. Taking a look, starting with advanced research, the main benefit here, I think that a lot of people are really bullish on advanced research. I haven't felt that it's very good. I've felt that it's solid, but I think a lot more people are a lot more bullish than me. I could be mistaken about this, so I just wanted to be clear that a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I think it's kind of medium, and I think it's going to be contextually dependent. So first of all, a lot of stuff is giving bonuses per level of education, and so if you don't have a lot of education levels, advanced research is not going to be that good. And I think using it on someone who's backward, while intuitive, if you don't have a lot of the levels of education, it's really not going to feel that good. The tech spread per level of education in particular is a little bit of a weird one, because if you're cutting edge, tech spread's generally not going to be beneficial for you. Tech spread is not as good as, like, if you get an economic bonus, you can just build more universities, and then the tech spread is not really too much of a factor. So tech spread is kind of medium overall as a modifier, but this ahead of time penalty is really good, and also is the max innovation investment per level of education. If you're at 100 literacy, the maximum innovation investment per level of education you can get is 200. So this would kick this up to 250. For most countries, even if you have high level of education and relatively high literacy rate, you're probably going to be at 150. So this makes you 33% faster, but this minus ahead of time penalty stacked with this is going to make things really feel a lot better when you are going ahead of time. This is going to be a minus 25% ahead of time penalty per level of education. In particular, I think advanced research is actually a really good one, but also one you rotate in and out. And in particular, I think you are going to be rotating it when you are starting to go ahead of time, and then when you stop going ahead of time, you rotate it out. Which means it's going to be particularly good if you have a lot of mandate and you've already maxed out all your groups. But there are going to be, points in the game, where you want to go for certain texts and not research all the tiers behind it. Just to be clear, what we're talking about when we're talking about the ahead of time penalty here is we currently have, we're in the tier 2 text here as Great Britain. If we come here and we look at the cost here, it will cost us 1,200 base and then an extra 3k from ahead of time penalties. And so if we get this 3k minus 25%, it'll be 7,500 off, so we would be able to research a lot faster. In particular, there are going to be periods of time where you go ahead of time for malaria prevention, or into kind of the super late game where you go ahead of time for compression ignition. Maybe you're going ahead of time for being able to go trench works, something like this. And also in multiplayer, being ahead of time on the military tech is extremely powerful. I think in single player, you just don't tangle when you don't, if you're behind on military tech, and you don't look to tangle with strong people anyways, and so it's much less of a thing. But I think this is going to be one that's going to be a lot better in multiplayer. In single player, I think getting text faster is not hyper valuable. I mean, it's definitely valuable, don't get me wrong, but I think in particular you are going to want this slotted in if you are ever going ahead of time. If you are just saying, okay, I'm just going to eat the malice, then this is really good. If you're not wanting to eat the malice, I don't think it's very good. And so it's going to be contextually pretty binary whether or not it's good. And so coming back into the browser, for advanced research, we are going to put it into B tier, which is to say, or it'll never be bad. Maybe I said it was bad. It'll never be bad, because getting tech faster is always good, but I think that other ones are going to look better at different points in time. And this is going to be one that you play around with, slotting it out and then trading it back out again, in particular. And next up is colonial offices. This one is kind of insane. And you could kind of just ignore everything here, except for this minus 5% infamy generation on unrecognized powers per level of colonial affairs. This is not very good in the early game, but as you get into the later game, and you stack these modifiers that give minus, minus cost on stuff, or minus infamy cost, like multilateral alliances, minus 25% infamy generation, civilizing mission, minus 25% on unrecognized powers. Also, colonization itself is minus 10 on unrecognized powers. If you stack all of these modifiers and have a cautious guy, which gives minus 20%, you can do stuff like subjugate China for under 20 infamy, which is insane. To be fair, it wouldn't be that much more. It's like 19 versus like 28 or something if you don't have this civilizing mission level 3, colonial affairs level 3. But this is going to be quite strong on the third level for colonizing colonial offices for this minus infamy generation. You also get plus colonial growth generation, but often you will hit caps anyways, so this is kind of not that big a deal. I don't think that this... I think this might override the cap, actually, even. But, like, this isn't a crazy good thing. The main thing is the minus infamy generation thing. And I think this is going to be a mainstay. I think that when you are... It's not going to necessarily going to be super good. It's not going to be an early game one, but in particular, as you start to get civilizing mission, I think you switch to only going after unrecognized powers. You slot in civilizing mission, you slot in this, and you just rake in all the unrecognized powers for super cheap on the infamy. And I think this is going to be kind of a ubiquitous play pattern if you were trying to play like optimally or like meta or this type of thing. And so we're going to put colonial offices in S tier, with the heavy emphasis that it is not good for big chunks of the game. Also, after you've conquered every single person who's unrecognized while still maintaining low infamy, which sounds like a meme, but you can do it. We basically did that on the UK run, where we're under 25 infamy and we conquer every single unrecognized power. Then this obviously becomes bad again. Also when you're done with colonialization, but it is going to be good in some phases of the game. Also, getting the minus colonial cost is going to be really nice on really high population countries, although you wanting to go to level 5 to make full use of this minus infamy generation, because it's per level, is going to be a thing. Colonial offices, when it was just straight up minus 50%, was the uberest of S tiers, but it's been significantly nerfed here. And next up, we're going to talk about construction. So construction, you get 10% state construction efficiency, and this is probably the biggest thing. And I think that on a just one mandate investment, this is actually just the straight up best thing you can do ever about anything at all times, ever. So I think the play pattern for almost everything is going to be going going construction 1 as your first thing. 10% state construction efficiency is so good. You also unlock the United Construction Conglomerate Company, which we could take a look at here, I think. Will it? Oh my god. It will not just automatically. So, taking a look at the United Construction Conglomerates, it is a tooling workshop company, and it is going to be considerably better than generic tools, which is also bound up with, arms industries and artillery industries, giving army offense. This is not very good. This is bound up with steel and glass. The construction sector throughput, important to emphasize, this is not efficiency. This just increases the goods that you're paying for, and also the construction output, which allows you to build a little bit better around mapping, but most of the cost of construction is not on the cost of labor, it's on the cost of goods. So this is less of a free money modifier. I think you end up saving like 5% on construction costs, so maybe that's actually pretty substantive. Actually, I think it's less than 5%, because so much of it is in the other stuff. I would have to do the closer bit of math on it, but I think that the main thing is that you are getting stellar industries on top of your tooling workshops, and there's only 2 tooling workshop companies in the entire game that are better than this, and so while I don't think you just beeline level 3 on construction most of the time, because I think the info usage for construction sectors is basically nothing. This is going to be valuable if you're not playing as either Greece or Belgium, where you have access to really strong companies. Mavag is also quite good, so Poland too, I suppose, will be in there. You do need to have the 10% or the 10 or higher steel mills, this type of thing. Important to note, the construction is also going to be applying to your subjects. And also, the way the math works is if you are having a negative modifier from, let's say, turmoil, the construction is going to be a lot more valuable than 10%. And so, like if you're at 90%, and you go up to 100%, that's not a 10% increase, that's an 11% increase. If you're at 50% construction efficiency and you go up to 60%, that's a 20% increase. Just the way the math works. And so this is going to be quite nice for when you immediately conquer a place and you immediately want to build something there because you're insane and you're not patient and whatever. This is going to be a really good one for that. So we're going to put this in A tier, or sorry, S tier, and we're going to put it at the top of S tier. And the main reason is I think that you just use this every single game. I don't think it makes the end game 4 slot very often, but I do think it's probably the opener most of the time. And what I mean by it is if you're gonna have 4 level 3 principal groups, I think construction probably doesn't make the cut a lot of the time. But I think it's probably the first choice at the beginning of the game, most games. Next up, we have kind of one that's just overshadowed more than anything else, and that is police coordination. The main benefit here is going to be, it's very similar to the education one, where you're going to get a bunch of bonuses per level of law enforcement, minus bureaucracy cost, okay. The big ones are the minus political movement radicalism per level, so this is minus 25%, so this is something. And also the plus 50 authority per level of law enforcement. However, I think by the time you can upgrade an institution to level 3, a principal group to level 3, you could probably have enough subjects that you would be generating more through vassalization, and you would only need just the first level. And I think that's the biggest thing that police coordination is giving for you. And I can't imagine a scenario where you would want to have both police coordination and vassalization, so we're going to put police coordination at D tier, just ahead of defensive coordination. Really think it's a bit weak. I mean, maybe there's something to it for the purposes of getting the AI to use the police so they don't rev as often, your subjects. But okay. Next up, we are going to talk about food standardization, which is a little bit of an interesting one. So generally speaking, when we're talking about mortality and standard of living, for a standard of living increasing your breeding rate for getting more pops, I think that these modifiers will generally be weaker than going and playing for, in particular, migration. Agricultural throughput only applies to grain, which is kind of a bad industry to emphasize, and efficient canning practices does add about 10% to the PM. For food industries, it just adds more groceries, it doesn't add more liquor, but this is exactly what you want because you run a glut of liquor these days, and so that's going to be quite strong. You just make more groceries, and it's roughly 10% more net outputs minus inputs, and so this is going to be quite strong. I think that this is actually just kind of overall a solid but not standoutish type of group that you maybe slot in sometimes. In particular, I think if you're going for a GDP maximizing run, starting on any country with a really high pop, and you're going to do some world conquest type shenanigans, this is probably a must-have, just because over the course of a long period of time, especially once you've acquired most of the pops, then growth rate becomes a lot more important. Also, plus SOL is going to help for making people happier. I don't think it increases people's political activity. I think that wealth increases political activity, and standard of living is distinct from wealth. But this minus mortality, I think if you stack minus mortality modifiers, it's also going to be quite strong. So if you also have, it's going to look stronger later on in the game when you have higher levels of health institution. It's going to look really good if you're Jewish, because the Jewish religion gets minus mortality modifier, and so that's kind of an interesting thing. But overall, we're just going to think of it as kind of a solid, these bonuses are okay. They're not bad, but I don't know. It's kind of, I think, a little bit medium-ish. And so we're going to slot it in right here in B tier. Next up, we are going to talk about the tentacles, the big tentacles, the foreign investment. You get increased leverage from economic dependence. Leverage is important for pulling people into your blocks. I think that this foreign investment is actually really stellar at kind of one thing, which is you temporarily slot it in so you can get enough leverage from economic dependence to force someone into your group. And this is going to be really good for Sovereign Empire to slot in for just the first level sometimes, and then switch to something else. So you store up 3 mandate, you slot in foreign investment, and then you subjugate the person, and then you slot to something else. It also gives you minus 50% cost for nationalization, which it's not going to be useful on laissez-faire, but again, if you're playing Sovereign Empire, it is going to be more useful in that sort of situation, and so I think that it makes a lot of sense, for this in particular, and also getting someone in your bloc isn't super valuable as a lot of the other blocks, but is really valuable on Sovereign Empire. The foreign investment rights in bloc members with lower rank, this is not too useful, but it forces it so that you can keep getting it. The thing is you will generally have foreign investment rights if in most people you pull into your bloc anyways. But this will effectively be a refund on, influence if you were having to pay for it before, and so to some extent it's a little like external trade, and I think that you can maybe play with this slotted in permanently, but I think what you do is you slot this in on a temporary basis to really have a go at overcoming some sort of leverage thing. I think it's a temporary one, much like how I think Sacred Civics, going in for the diplomatic acceptance from someone with the same religion, is like a temporary one. That's a little bit interesting. I think that we're going to put it in B tier, but very tentatively kind of at the backish of B tier here, where it's like conditionally going to be good. Okay, next up we have freedom of movement. Plus 25% migration quota. I think this used to be plus 50%. It's been nerfed down quite a bit. Plus 50% mass migration attraction. If you have this in, and the USA does not have freedom of movement, you will be the mass migration target. And it's kind of a winner-take-all thing, and so this is really good. And you also get increased exchange for arts academies and university, which will each give you locally plus 20% migration attraction. This allows you to just hyper-win the migration game, and also allow migration within power block. That is one that is a little bit new. Did they just add that? Pump the brakes. So let's take a quick look at this when we kind of come into game, because we can also take a look at the 20% itself. But if we take a look here, freedom of movement here, is that allows migration within power block. I think that's a new tool tulip. And that changes things a little bit. That effectively makes it so you have a customs union when it comes to migration. I assume it's not going to force people on a migration law. You cannot enforce migration laws with this, which would make it just over the top. But here's the increased exchange, 20%, 20%. But this is good to know. Was this just not in the tooltip before? I'm not sure. But this, in either case, this is going to be one of the strongest principal groups overall, because migration is just such a good way of getting pops, but it is not going to be strong until you get multiculturalism. It's also going to be way stronger if Heavenly Kingdom spawns versus Heavenly Kingdom not spawning, because Heavenly Kingdom does have no migration control, so it is going to be a little bit variance. But if you're European, this will be very good early on, and if you're not European, it will be good once you have multiculturalism in particular, and it just causes you to get basically all the mass migrations, and you can also intentionally build up universities and arts academies, each giving you 20% migration attraction, to really force migration exactly where you want it, or to just upgrade your raw mass migration attraction. But this 50% mass migration attraction modifier just by itself will kind of put you ahead of the USA, and will allow you to pull off a lot of migrants. Now, the thing is after a certain point, if your SOL is high enough, you'll be winning the migration game anyways, but even if you're doing that, the migration quota is going to be quite nice, because you're normally gated by the number of pops that can go in and out. By the outgoing pops, you're gated by the number of pops there, or population there, and by the incoming pops, you're gated by infrastructure, and this just increases the amount that can come or leave, and so it is going to be really good. And so it's going to be best after multiculturalism, but we're still going to put it in S tier here. Next up, we talked about this one a little bit already, but I generally think if you're trying to create your own market, market unifications, like, it's better to just have the primary principal group of trade. This is a strong enough principal group that if you want to market, I think you just go for this, because in particular, market unification just looks a lot worse than internal trade, and they're kind of parallels, where they're both giving company throughput and convoys and this type of stuff, but you're just going to be getting a lot more out of this, where you're going to be getting the minus cost of port connections on this versus market unification, and so I think market unification is just a D tier thing. I think it would not be D tier if there was no trade power block. I think this is maybe something that would be reasonable to go for, but with the lack of a trade power block, I just think it's not going to cut it here. So we're going to put it just ahead of police, and this is kind of the last of the 3 you should probably never use. I guess maybe 4 or 5, but like these, I mean, just really just seem bad. Next up, we have militarized industry, which is kind of interesting. It allows balloon reconnaissance, which is a PM that uses oil, so it's not super good early on, but it does seem kind of okay for the military stuff. I don't think it's like worth going a principal group just for a military PM. And the main other thing to write home about is this minus military goods cost. You do get throughput on all these industries, but that's really kind of just a weak modifier. I think if you're stacking minus military goods cost, militarized industry can be okay. This was a lot better, but then it just very recently got nerfed. And the way it got nerfed is you used to be able to, while on peasant levies, you used to be able to get this minus 10% military goods cost, and then you used to be able to cheese getting conscripts to upgrade their PMs further. Now conscripts cannot use cannons categorically, and so this is, I mean, you can still do it with just your primary military and just go peasant levies and still stack minus military goods cost. The person to do it with is Qing, because they get some on their armed forces IG, allowing you to stack a total of minus 65 military goods cost, and this minus military goods cost is a free money modifier. So then you just blast a whole bunch more military, you have this military industrial complex thing going on. I think for the most part, the only country you use this on, militarized industry, is Qing. I think it's not worth it otherwise, but this is this represents minus 30% military goods cost once you already have minus 50% military goods cost, because of the way math works, right? And so, yeah, so we're going to slot it in kind of at the bottom of C tier where it's okay. I'm going to put it here. And next up, we have one that is almost good, but is just kind of not there, and that's transportation infrastructure. Now, we're not going to pull out the PMs for all of these, but roughly speaking, each of these is 20% more efficient than the base railway, which is pretty good for joint electric and joint steam. However, it's like 25% more efficient on diesel trains, which is pretty nice, actually. I think the main attraction is the better PMs. 20% more convoys is also a pretty strong modifier, but the land trade capacity is also not nothing. If you're running a bunch of land trade routes, this could be kind of okay-ish. And then the little bit of extra infrastructure, this is most of the modifiers for this are flat. This is a percentage modifier, which means you're going to be getting a lot of extra free infrastructure. But the free infrastructure is kind of antagonistic with the better railways. I don't really understand why we're trying to get freer infrastructure when one of the better modifiers we're getting is better infrastructure. So I think that like these two just kind of almost non-bow with each other, because once we already have the railways, it's gonna not feel as bad building a railway, you know, to handle the infrastructure, and then we're just getting extra infrastructure on top of it. But okay, it's just like kind of almost there. It's like almost reasonable, and so we're just going to slot it in kind of ahead of ideological union here. I think sacred civics we had up here. No, we didn't. Yeah, sacred civics, these two are just kind of weird, but we'll have this as like kind of almost playable. Definitely kind of a weird looking tier list, but this is going to be the tier list that we have kind of going on here. And I thought since we made this video so long, we would also have a summary at the back here. So first up, we have construction. I think construction is really good for the 10% state construction efficiency on the first mandate progress. The third mandate progress also giving the construction companies somewhat solid, but I think that you slot this in almost every game kind of as your first one, and just play off of the state construction efficiency unless you have something you really need to go for, and it's just very, very efficient. It probably doesn't make the end game cut when you're looking at which 4 principles you need to have, but it's going to be, I think, just most common in your games. Next up, we have colonial offices. The big one to write about is the 3rd mandate level, which is going to give you an additional 5% reduction on unrecognized powers. If you reduction on infamy. If you stack these modifiers, it's extraordinarily powerful. You could subjugate China for under 20 infamy. You could take states off of them for like 4 infamy. It's really, really, really strong. You have to kind of stack it with the cautious rulers, so if you're not going to manipulate IG leaders, it gets a lot worse. And obviously, if you're RPing, why are you looking at a tier list? But if you're RPing, it's going to be worse as well. Or you need to not manipulate your leader to be cautious for whatever reason. But if you're doing that, you're stacking all the different modifiers you can get for infamy reduction. The more of them you have, the more valuable they become, and so this is really valuable if you're stacking modifiers. Next up, we have a freedom of movement, which is just going to be absolutely insane for pulling extra migrants. Really just allows you to win the migration game super, super hard. If you're already winning it, it's maybe a little bit less useful, but it does increase the quotas, so even if you are winning it, it will still allow more and more people in, and this is going to be valuable. I think that this one's really, really strong. In the abstract, it might just... for a while I thought this was the strongest, but and now I'm not so sure. I think it's like definitely stronger than construction. Just construction is just so disgustingly efficient for a single mandate. Next up, we have external trade. Specifically, the level 2 is the thing worth writing home about. It gives you the influential trade center, which is going to give you a lot more influence, which is going to be really good in the early game for making sure that all the GPs are happy with you, so you could try and win your bankrolls. This is going to be really, really strong, and then it's going to kind of fall off in the later phases of the game. But if you're trying to pull a bunch of people in your blocks, you're trying to run a bunch of Diplo agreements, it will be useful, especially once you're already GP and you can't run that many rivalries. It will give you, if you have 500 trade routes, it's giving you 1,000 Diplo, so this is going to be strong. Next up, we have vassalization. The big thing to write home about is the 25 authority per subject on the first level, but the second level also gives you more income from them, so that's going to be non-zero kind of usefulness here. But the 25 authority per level, if you have, 20 subjects or 15 subjects, starts to give you like 500 really disgusting amounts of authority, which is going to be even better if you are a sovereign empire specifically. I think this is kind of maybe a little bit more sovereign empire specific. I think this might be the most overrated of any of the things that I have, but we have it here because they get the decree cost reduction modifier, so you can really just stack like 4 or 5 decrees in like 8 states or something pretty efficiently. Next up, we have internal trade, which I think is kind of the late game transition if you are on the trade power block, where it's just pretty solid, giving you economic bonuses and a lot of convoys, company bonuses, which are going to get better as you get later in the game, and you need less Diplo from external trade, and also giving you 10% throughput on the companies is going to be a big one. Next up, we have the Trade League Principal Group, which I think is probably the strongest overall. Really the biggest thing is that it's easier to pull people in your block, but the biggest thing is that your cohesion will almost always be maxed out. And your cohesion being maxed out is going to be really nice for generating mandate, and you also, this has the fewest requirements to be able to make, everyone can make it. Next up, we have Sovereign Empire, which I think is going to a lot of the time be better than Trade League, but a lot of the time also be worse than a Trade League, and it is going to be, I think it kind of pigeonholes you a little bit into not playing laissez-faire in order to make full use of it. You lose infamy decay, or sorry, not infamy decay, liberty desire on subjects. This is kind of one of the big appeals. You have a better statue. We already talked about that. But also you are going to be able to subjugate anyone who's a minor power or lower into your block. But the problem is, or if they're in your block, you could just turn them into your subject. The problem is pulling people in your block is the absolute hardest on this one. And so you might have to make use of the tentacles, you might have to make use of interventionism and building in other people's countries. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the video, so we're not going to go into detail. Next up is advanced research, which I think is really, really good when you're researching ahead of time and just kind of medium when you're not. It maybe goes a little bit higher. Maybe it deserves the kind of the back at A tier here. I know a lot of people are really bullish on this, a lot more bullish than I am, but I think that if you're not ahead of time, it's just like not that good, but if you're ahead of time, it's insane. So and that is researching stuff when you don't have all the previous other levels filled out. Next up, we have the food company, which I think is just kind of always solid. I think if you're going for a GDP maximizing run, in terms of like a world conquest type thing, it's probably good to run, especially if you are playing China or EIC or one of these ones that starts with a lot. But overall, it's just very modest. It gives you a better PM for groceries. You need to already have vacuum canning to make use of it, so it's definitely not an early game thing. It gives you increased SOL minus mortality, which is going to be better as you stack up your health institution anyways, so really not going to be a very good early game in my opinion. Next up, we have the tentacle one. I forget what it's called. I don't know what it's called. I just know the sound it makes when it puts its suckers on me, which is going to the big thing is going to allow you to pull people in the block a little bit easier. It's also going to allow investment rights. I think that this is one where you slot it in sometimes and then you do it just temporarily to pull someone in the block, and then you slot it out for something else that's a bit more useful. Next up, we have aggressive coordination. Notably, it's on the first level here, so if you have 3 stored mandate, you could go to level 1 of this and then back to level 2 of something instantly. I don't think there's a cooldown on that, so I think you could just swap, pull in a block, swap something else. Next up, we have aggressive coordination, which if you're going high infamy, you definitely want to be using, and you probably actually engage the play pattern of swapping in the military treaty and this is the main reason why you're going to want to do a military treaty. Next up is transportation and infrastructure. Overall, just kind of middling, but just doesn't push the needle enough, and you only have 4 slots, so I think while it's like kind of the most powerful thing that you have that isn't one of these, you just like probably don't ever slot it in. Next we have a sovereign empire, which is semi-RP, but also being able to change people to your laws is kind of nice, especially for opening borders. It's playing this along with like freedom of movement and trying to get a whole bunch of migrants is like definitely something you can play for. One of the problems is you're generating cohesion through your own legitimacy. So if your legitimacy tanks, you're going to struggle. I think there's other ways to get penalized in this. So it can be hard to maintain high cohesion. It can be hard to maintain high cohesion on sovereign empire as well, because it is kind of subjected to your subjects' liberty, desire, and size. Next up, we have the ideological. Let me just check. Ideological truth, which overall is not going to be that good. Same with creative legislature. They kind of just both help you pass laws. They're not too much to write home about. In particular, they're not really doing anything crazy good. And so we're just going to kind of, Yep. Sacred civics is an interesting one. I think that sometimes is worth actually, no, okay, Sacred Civics I think is worth it just for this occasionally, which is the higher diplomatic proposal acceptance for people in the same religion. There's maybe some scenarios where you just slot it in for level 1 just to get people to agree to your thing, and then you just slot out. Next up, we have military industry, or whatever it's called. Let's take a look. Militarized industry. In particular, is giving you minus military goods costs. I think this is really good if you're playing China, maybe. It's certainly gotten nerfed, but it's also... if you're not playing China, you probably never use it, so I don't know. And next up, we have the military treaty. I think the main reason to do this one is for the aggressive coordination, for the extra maneuvers. That's the main thing that you're getting from this. And that's kind of it. So if you ever turn and want to go high infamy, swapping over to this, busting up the great powers, and then swapping to a trade league is probably a common play pattern, but it's not what we've tested a lot because small sample size. Next up, we kind of already talked about creative legislature. Overall, the religious convocation seems like a bit of a meme. In particular, late game economics-wise, divine economics has some modifiers that are like, I guess, kind of reasonable. So I think what you probably do is you probably go Sacred Civics in the early game if you're religious convocation, and then the late game you end up going the economic one. When you could just swap 3 for 3, and you just have your mandate completely filled. You could just slot on over. Next up, we have exploitation of members. I don't think this is good. I don't think it's worth using. It decreases your cohesion a lot in exchange for stripping more stuff off of your members, but if you want authority, you already have vassalization that you have access to, and if you want diplo, it's going to be much more efficient to go external trade. So I think it's not worth using. I don't think that the market unification is worth using. I think that you should just form a trade league if you were wanting to use this principle, and so that reason it's going to be down here. I think if it might be at the top of C tier if the trade league didn't exist, but I think it's not worth using a principal slot for this when you could just go trade league, because the main thing you're getting is a customs union, and internal trade is just like strictly better than market unification. Police, the main thing it's giving you is authority, but vassalization is going to be a better way to generate authority, so it's just going to not be worth using. And defensive coordination, I believe, makes it so you can't annex subjects, which I think is just bad. And it does this at the first level, and it gives you some stuff on defense. And so overall, I don't think it's good. I think military treaty is going to be really good in single player in particular, though. It does also give, like, what is it, conscription rate? Or training rate, or whatever it is. I think this is going to also be good in single player, or sorry, multiplayer, but not very good in single player, where generating the extra maneuvers is going to be useful. But that is kind of the tier list here. I hope you guys enjoyed. It's been a little bit of a long one. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. You know, do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a good one.